The ionization smell was the worst part. Not the emptiness. Not the collapsed skylines or the fields of cracked concrete pushing up through what used to be suburbs. Not even the absence of voices. That particular grief had dulled over the 4 years since the vanishing. No, it was the smell. A faint electrical charge that clung to every surface where a human body had stood one moment and simply ceased to stand the next. Like ozone after a thunderstorm. Like the universe had rubbed itself raw. Mara Voss was 23 years old, and as far as every piece of functioning technology she'd managed to salvage could tell her, she was the last living human being on Earth. She didn't accept it. Not really. Acceptance would mean something final, and she was too practical for theatrics. She filed the fact the way she filed everything, into the operational section of her mind between water filtration schedule and check solar panels at dawn. You couldn't grieve what you hadn't confirmed. You could only keep moving. She lived in what had been a university agricultural research station outside Freiburg, Germany, chosen not for sentimentality but for logic, geothermal heating, a functioning greenhouse array, stored seed banks, and a roof that hadn't caved. She'd spent the first winter just learning to keep the tomatoes alive. By spring she'd mapped the water table. By summer she was growing enough to stop rationing. Survival, she'd learned, was mostly just problem-solving with higher stakes. She kept records. Meticulous, obsessive records, handwritten in the margins of whatever books remained, and typed into the 2 functioning laptops she kept charged through a jury-rigged solar system. Not because anyone would read them. Because the act of recording meant she believed, on some cellular level, that someone eventually might. Day 1461. Wind from the northwest. Repaired the east polytunnel frame. Greenhouse temp stable at 19 degrees Celsius overnight. Heard something in the upper atmosphere at approximately 0300 hours. Not aircraft, the acoustic profile was wrong. No visible exhaust signature. Either my instruments are drifting or the object was enormous. Logging for future reference. She almost didn't bother writing that last part. It felt too close to hope, and hope had a way of making the silence louder. But she wrote it. They came down 3 weeks later. Not crashing. Not with the cinematic violence of science fiction she'd consumed as a teenager. They descended the way fog descends, gradually, inevitably, already present by the time you noticed. A craft the color of pale bone settled into the eastern field at 4 in the morning, and by the time Mara had the rifle up and her heart rate somewhere below catastrophic, the ramp was already open. She stayed in the tree line for 6 hours. Took notes. There were 4 of them visible. Tall, bilaterally symmetrical, roughly humanoid but with a proportional elongation in the torso and limb segments that suggested a different gravity history. Their skin caught light strangely, somewhere between matte and iridescent, shifting with body temperature or emotion or both. They wore layered garments that seemed functional rather than decorative. They moved with the deliberate economy of people trained not to startle wildlife. One of them kept looking toward the tree line. Not scanning. Looking. As if she already knew. Mara noted the distinction and hated that she noted it. By noon, hunger made the decision her pride wouldn't. She stepped out of the trees with her hands visible and the rifle slung across her back, accessible but not threatening, a posture she'd spent years cultivating with herself for hypothetical situations she'd never believed would become real. The one who'd been looking found her immediately. She was taller than the others, carrying herself with the precise stillness of someone accustomed to being watched. Her eyes, 4 of them arranged in a vertical diamond configuration, were the particular amber gold of old circuit boards, and they tracked Mara with an intensity that felt less like threat assessment and more like relief. The translator device they produced was crude by what Mara would later understand were their standards. An emergency unit, field grade. The voice it generated was flat and slightly delayed, but the words were clear enough. We have been searching for biosignatures for 11 of your months. We did not expect to find only one. Mara looked at the craft. Looked at the 4 aliens. Looked at the one with the amber eyes who hadn't stopped looking at her. Neither did I, she said. Her name, rendered into sounds a human throat could approximate, came out something like Valith Sornka, second daughter of the Sornka diplomatic lineage, attached to this survey mission in an official capacity that Mara would spend the next 2 weeks learning to understand. In practice, she was the mission's science lead. Theoretically, she was here to document, sample, and report. Operationally, she'd been the one to push for a 3rd search sweep when Command had already recommended closing the Earth file. Mara learned this not from Valith directly but from the crew member who seemed most willing to explain things. a shorter individual named Thesek who communicated with the exhausted transparency of someone who'd been on a long trip with difficult people and had simply run out of patience for protocol. She argued for 6 hours, Thesek said on day 4, while helping Mara reinforce the greenhouse frame in exchange for a tour of her seed cataloging system. Their species, it turned out, had an almost compulsive interest in botanical organization. Command said the probability of surviving biosignatures was below threshold. She said threshold was a political term, not a scientific one. Mara filed that information in a different section of her mind. Not operational. Somewhere closer. Why did she care? She asked, keeping her voice level. You didn't know there was a person here. Just biosignatures. Thesek adjusted a clamp with more attention than it required. She said a biosignature is a life. That we don't get to decide what probability makes a life worth looking for. That night, Mara sat with her laptop and opened a new log file. She stared at it for a long time. Then she wrote. Day 1482. The research station has guests. 4 of them. They came looking for signs of life and found me, which I suppose means the definition of miracle is just something that beats the odds by enough to make the math embarrassing. The one in charge is named Valith. She looks at me the way I look at the last seed in a packet, like losing it would be a specific kind of catastrophic. I don't know what that means yet. I intend to find out. She saved the file. Outside, the ionization smell had faded. For the first time in 4 years, the silence felt less like absence and more like the held breath before something begins. Trust, Mara had learned, was not a feeling. It was a practice. A series of small, testable decisions that either compounded into reliability or didn't, and you kept the score in the back of your head whether you meant to or not. She applied this framework to her alien guests the same way she applied it to everything else. Methodically, without sentiment, with the full acknowledgement that sentiment would arrive on its own schedule regardless. By the end of the first week, she had preliminary scores. Thesek, highly trustworthy. Incapable of sustained dishonesty, apparently constitutionally, their species communicated with a subtle chromatic shift in the skin under stress that made lying physically costly. They'd explained this themselves, unprompted, on day 2, which Mara noted was itself a form of honesty impressive enough to adjust the baseline score upward. The other 2 crew members, Perik and Osei, whose translated name she was fairly confident she was mispronouncing, were professional, cautious, and deeply uncomfortable in ways they were trying hard not to show. She didn't hold that against them. She was fairly uncomfortable herself. Valith was more complex. Not untrustworthy, nothing in her behavior scored that way. But she was careful in a specific manner that Mara recognized because she practiced it herself. The carefulness of someone who understood that what they wanted and what was wise were not always aligned, and had built habits around the gap. She asked excellent questions. She listened to the answers with the full weight of her attention in a way that felt almost aggressive in its completeness. She didn't volunteer information about herself, but she never deflected direct questions either. She answered them precisely at the exact depth that was asked, no more. Mara found this both admirable and annoying. Your preservation systems are more sophisticated than our preliminary scans suggested, Valith said on the 8th day. They were in the seed vault, the real one, underground, where Mara kept the properly cryogenic specimens, and Valith was moving through the catalog with a focus that hadn't broken in 2 hours. The maintenance protocols. You developed these yourself? Over 2 winters, yeah. Mara cross-referenced a temperature log. The original university system had documentation, but half of it assumed staff I didn't have. I had to redesign the humidity cycling from scratch. What was your technical background before the vanishing? Environmental biology. 2nd year of my doctorate. She paused. I was studying seed dispersal patterns in post-agricultural landscapes. Valith's amber eyes moved to her. All 4 of them, briefly, in that way that Mara had learned meant something close to full attention rather than surveillance. That seems relevant. Yeah. Mara kept her voice dry. Turns out the universe has a sense of irony. Something shifted at the edge of Valith's expression. Not quite a smile. Her facial musculature was arranged differently, and Mara had learned not to map human emotional expressions onto alien faces, a mistake with real interpretive consequences. But something. An acknowledgement. A recognition of humor as a survival tool. Among my people, Valith said, returning to the catalog, there is a concept, Kareth. Roughly, the idea that a person's training and the crisis they face were always in conversation with each other. That readiness is not coincidence but a kind of slow preparation. That sounds like a way of making meaning out of bad luck. Yes, Valith said simply. That is exactly what it is. We find it useful. Mara looked at her. Do you believe it? Pause. The precise, considered kind. I believe that meaning is functional regardless of whether it is cosmically true. The belief in Kareth produces better decisions than the belief in pure contingency. That seems sufficient. Mara turned that over for a moment. Then she went back to her temperature log. That's the most pragmatic thing I've heard anyone say in 4 years, she said. Including myself, and I'm very pragmatic. I know, Valeth said. I have been reading your logs. Mara's hands stilled on the keyboard. You left them accessible, Valeth added, and there was the careful precision again, not defensive, not apologetic, just factual. I should have asked. I did not. I am informing you now. The silence held for 3 seconds. Mara counted them. Which ones? She asked. All of them. From the beginning. 4 years of logs. 4 years of the interior of her mind, written down because she'd needed somewhere to put it. Everything she'd felt and refused to feel and talked herself out of feeling and felt anyway in the margins between function and sleep. Okay, she said finally. I can discuss anything in them that you wish. Or nothing. I will follow your preference. I'll let you know, Mara said. She didn't bring it up that day. But that night she opened a new log and found herself writing differently, more carefully, yes, but also more honestly, in the way you write when you know someone real might read it, and that possibility, instead of terrifying you, has somehow started to feel like the opposite. She didn't examine that feeling too closely. She just let it be in the file. The political situation, when Thesek finally explained it fully, was thornier than Mara had initially parsed. The Vathiri, Valeth's people, the civilization that had built the bone-white ship now sitting in her field, were not the only species in this region of space. They operated within a coalition of 7 civilizations, loosely federated under a governance structure that Thesek described as functional but contentious, like all governance structures that work. The discovery of a surviving human carried implications that none of them had been authorized to navigate alone. Earth is a contested designation, Thesek explained, with the tone of someone delivering bad news they'd been rehearsing. 5 of the 7 coalition members submitted preservation claims within the first year after the vanishing. Technically, the planet is in adjudication. Adjudication, Mara repeated. Legal process. To determine stewardship rights. Rights to what, exactly? Thesek's skin shifted, the chromatic tell of discomfort. The land. The biological archive. The cultural materials. And, a pause, any surviving population. Mara set down her coffee. She'd been making it from roasted dandelion root for 2 years, and she'd gotten remarkably good at it, which was the kind of achievement that felt impressive and absurd in equal measure. They want rights to me. They want rights to humanity. You are, currently, the operational definition of that category. She looked at the ceiling. At the water stain in the corner that she'd been meaning to address for 6 months. At the ordinary texture of a world that had just gotten significantly more complicated. Does Valeth know about the adjudication? She asked. Yes. Did she tell me? Thesek's skin shifted again. She was building toward it. Mara nodded once. Stood up. Walked to the door. Where are you going? Thesek asked. To have a conversation, she said, with someone who reads my logs and was building toward something. Outside, Valeth was exactly where she always was at this hour, at the edge of the field, watching the tree lean with the patience of someone who understood the value of stillness. She heard Mara coming and didn't turn around, which meant she'd been expecting her. You were going to tell me? Mara said. Not a question. Yes. When? When I had finished determining how to tell you in a way that was complete without being overwhelming. Pause. I had not finished. Mara stood beside her. The sun was going down, painting the broken skyline in colors that were still beautiful despite everything, or maybe because of everything. She'd never fully sorted that out. Tell me now. Incomplete is fine. I've been managing incomplete information for 4 years. And Valeth told her. All of it. In the precise, undeflecting way that was her nature, without softening what was hard and without performing what she didn't feel. By the time she finished, the sky was fully dark, and Mara had asked 11 questions, each of which Valeth had answered with the same completeness. At the end Mara said, You pushed for the 3rd sweep. Yes. You spent 6 hours arguing for it. It was the correct position. You didn't know I was here. No. But the biosignature was real. That was sufficient. Mara looked up at the stars. At the gap in the familiar constellations where the Vathiri ship was now invisible against the dark. At a universe that had taken almost everything and apparently wasn't finished either taking or giving. Thank you, she said. For the sweep. You do not need to thank me for that. I know I don't need to. She looked at Valeth. I wanted to. The careful stillness between them held a different quality now. Warmer. More honest. The kind of silence that isn't absence but presence. Two people standing in the same dark, deciding, separately and together, what comes next. There were things Mara had expected to feel, hypothetically, if contact ever happened. She'd run the scenarios in her head on long quiet nights. Awe, terror, the species-level vertigo of discovering humanity wasn't alone. What she hadn't modeled was the mundane version. The way an alien could become familiar not through grand revelation but through the accumulation of small, ordinary moments. Valeth, it turned out, was meticulous about tools. She would not set an instrument down incorrectly, always returned it to its calibrated resting position, always checked the reading twice. Mara caught herself watching this habit and recognized it from the inside, the exact same obsessive precision she applied to her own measurements, born from the knowledge that out here, a wrong reading had consequences. You double-check everything, Mara said one afternoon, watching Valeth recalibrate the atmospheric sampler for the third time. Even things you've already checked. Error compounds, Valeth said as if this were obvious. Yeah. Mara leaned against the workbench. Yeah, it does. Valeth looked at her with that full attention expression. You do the same. I do. It is not a common trait. Most people check once and assume. Pause. I have found it isolating at times. Mara felt something move in her chest. Not sentiment exactly, more like recognition, the specific relief of being seen accurately. Me too, she said. They worked in silence for a while. Good silence. The kind that doesn't need filling. The political situation was developing in ways that required Mara to do things she found deeply uncomfortable, chief among them, negotiate her own legal status with entities she'd never met, in a governance framework she'd had 2 weeks to learn, while also managing the increasingly clear fact that the Vathiri ship's departure timeline was not indefinite. Command had given Valeth a contact date. She'd relate it to Mara the morning after their conversation in the field, in the same complete, precise manner, 22 days. After that, they needed to file a formal report. The report would either contain Mara's voluntary cooperative statement regarding her wishes for Earth's stewardship adjudication, or it would note her as an uncontacted subject, which carried significantly worse legal implications for everyone. What are my actual options? Mara had asked, her notebook open, pen moving. Valeth had listed them with the care of someone who understood that the list was not comfortable. Remain on Earth under coalition protection pending adjudication outcome, which could take years and offered no guarantee of the result she'd want. Leave Earth voluntarily and accept provisional Vathiri diplomatic status, which would give her standing in the adjudication but meant leaving. Or challenge the adjudication itself on grounds of indigenous sovereignty, which was a real legal mechanism, almost entirely untested, and which would require a level of institutional support she did not currently have. There's a fourth option, Mara had said. Valeth had waited. Do nothing. Stay. Let the adjudication happen without my participation and deal with whatever comes. That is technically a choice, Valeth had said carefully. It is not one I would recommend. Why not? Because the parties with the strongest claims are not motivated by your well-being. Passive subjects in contested adjudications tend to become symbolic rather than practical considerations. The outcome is typically worse. Typically. In every documented case. But the sample size is small. Mara had closed her notebook. This is a lot to process. Yes. Can I have a week? Yes. Will you? She'd stopped. Started again. I'd like to keep talking through it. If that's something you're willing to do. Valeth had looked at her for a moment. I would not have offered the information if I weren't willing to discuss it, she'd said. And then, slightly quieter, I would have discussed it regardless of the information. That had stayed with Mara. She turned it over in her mind the way she turned over good observations, not trying to resolve them, just letting the weight of them settle, finding where they fit. What was developing between them was not something Mara had a clean vocabulary for, which was itself informative. She had vocabulary for loneliness. She'd been living in it for 4 years and had catalogued its textures with scientific precision. She had vocabulary for friendship, for intellectual kinship, for the specific warmth of someone who made the room better by being in it. She didn't have precise vocabulary for the way Valeth's attention felt like something she'd been rationing without knowing she was rationing it. The way a conversation with her produced thoughts that kept generating after the conversation ended. The way Mara had started, without deciding to, accounting for where Valeth was in any given part of the day. She wrote about it in her log, carefully. I am aware that 4 years of isolation have made me susceptible to attachment. I am aware that the circumstances are extreme and that context shapes feeling. I am holding both those things. I am also holding the fact that holding them has not changed anything. The next morning, Valeth found her in the greenhouse and said, without preamble, I would like to show you something if you are willing. The something was a record, audio and visual, played through the ship's portable display, of Valeth's argument to command for the third search sweep. Mara sat on an overturned crate and watched 6 minutes of footage in a language she didn't speak, watching Valeth's posture and cadence and the particular set of her jaw, and the translator device caught maybe half of it but enough. A biosignature is not a probability. It is a fact. If there is a life, there is a life. We do not weight lives against mission economy. We go. When it ended, Mara sat with it for a moment. Why are you showing me this? She asked. Because you thanked me for the sweep, Valeth said, and I wanted you to understand that it was not a casual decision. It cost something. You're standing with command? Among other things. Pause. I wanted you to have the complete information. Mara looked at her. At the amber eyes that saw her clearly and didn't look away. At the careful person who built toward things and was now, apparently, choosing not to build slowly anymore. Valeth, she said. Yes. I don't have a framework for this. Neither do I, Valeth said. My people have no precedent for this particular situation. I have checked. And I find that the absence of precedent does not change the situation. Only my ability to prepare for it. Mara breathed out. What do you want? She asked. Plainly. Directly. The way you have to ask sometimes when everything else is too layered. Valeth was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then, to not make the decision about whether to go before I have to. To have the time that remains be honest. She met Mara's eyes. To continue being in conversation with you for as long as that is something you also want. It was the most careful declaration Mara had ever heard. It was also, she thought, the most sincere. Okay, she said for the second time in this strange new chapter of her life. Yeah. Okay. Outside the greenhouse the fields were green and growing. The seed vault hummed its steady refrigeration cycle below the earth. Somewhere above, in the black beyond the atmosphere, a question was being asked by 5 governments about who had the right to call this place theirs. Inside, 2 people, from different stars, different biologies, different histories, sat with the weight of it together, which turned out to be significantly more manageable than either of them had done anything alone in a long time. The word forbidden arrived not dramatically but bureaucratically, the way most things that matter tend to arrive. It came in the form of a coalition transmission, routed through the ship's communication array and translated in real time, from an entity called the Oversight Commission for Non-Coalition Species Interaction. The language was dense and precise and carried the specific flavor of legal writing across what Mara assumed were language and species barriers, full of qualifications that meant things while appearing not to mean things. The relevant clause, stripped of its diplomatic insulation, read, Representatives of coalition member species are prohibited from establishing personal bonds of advocacy or affiliation with non-designated subjects pending resolution of stewardship proceedings, in order to preserve the integrity of the adjudication process. Thesek translated the subtext without being asked. It means they're worried Valeth will advocate for what you want instead of what's politically convenient. Will she? Mara asked. Thesek's skin did a thing it did when a question had an obvious answer being asked for other reasons. She already is. Mara read the transmission again. Noted the phrases that were doing the most work. Personal bonds of advocacy or affiliation. Not personal bonds, that was notable. The prohibition was specifically on advocacy. On Valeth using whatever existed between them to shape a legal process. This is about the adjudication, she said. Not about the other thing. In theory, Thesek said. In practice, the Commission will use the prohibition to argue anything inconvenient is improperly motivated. So the prohibition is a tool. Most prohibitions are. Mara folded the transmission and put it in the file she was keeping. Already thick, already annotated. She'd become, by necessity, a student of coalition law in the past 11 days, with Thesek and Valeth as her tutors and her own meticulous note-taking as her only real defense against drowning in it. She wasn't drowning. But she could see the depth from here. I need to talk to Valeth, she said. Valeth had received the same transmission. Of course she had, it was addressed to her. She was in the ship's small working space that Mara had come to think of as her office, sitting very still in the way she sat when she was processing something with the full weight of her attention. You've seen it, Mara said. Yes. Tell me what it actually means. Valeth looked at her. Then, in the precise manner that Mara had come to understand was not distance but respect, the refusal to simplify a complex thing just because simplification would be easier, it means that any action I take in your interest during the adjudication can be challenged as improperly motivated. My advocacy is compromised by association. So you can't advocate for me. I can advocate for legally correct positions. I cannot be seen as advocating specifically for you without that advocacy being dismissed. Mara sat down across from her. And the other thing? The prohibition on personal bonds of affiliation. Pause. It is unenforceable in the way it is written. They cannot prohibit what exists internally. They can only prohibit its effect on external proceedings. Valetha's eyes met hers. They know this. The prohibition is meant to discourage rather than prevent. Is it working? No, Valeth said simply. But I want you to understand what it costs. I will recuse myself from direct adjudication proceedings in which my impartiality could be questioned. That leaves you with less representation in those proceedings, not more. I know. This is a consequence of, she paused, of what this is, between us. I know that too. Mara looked at her. Are you asking if I want to step back? Make it cleaner? I'm telling you the cost, so that your choice is informed. There was again. The complete information. The refusal to make the decision for her by withholding. Mara thought about 4 years of silence. About the precise weight of existing without being known by anyone. About what it had meant to have her logs read and to have someone sit with her in the dark and talk honestly about impossible things. No, she said. I don't want to step back. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. But I need you to tell me if it becomes the wrong call. If your compromised position makes things worse overall. I need you to tell me that even if it's hard. I will. Promise me that. In whatever your equivalent of a promise is. Valeth was quiet for a moment. Then she pressed 2 fingers to the inside of her own wrist, a gesture Mara hadn't seen before. There is an old form, she said. My people call it Vathar. A witnessed commitment. It means, I will carry this as weight, not as words. What does the gesture mean? It means the commitment is bound to the pulse. That breaking it would be a physical thing. Mara looked at the 2 fingers against the pale iridescent skin of Valetha's wrist. At the quiet gravity of it. She reached out and covered Valetha's hand with her own. Neither of them moved for a moment. Just let the weight settle. Okay, Mara said. Then here's mine. I will tell you when I'm scared and I will tell you when I'm angry, and I will not make you guess at what I need. Because I know that guessing is the part that costs you. Valeth looked at their hands. Then up. You learned that from my logs, she said. I learned it from watching you. Mara didn't move her hand. You read mine. I read yours. A long pause. Then quietly, when? Thesek left the translation archive accessible, Mara said. I should have asked. I did not. I am informing you now. Something happened in Valetha's expression. The same something that had happened in the seed vault the first time but larger now. Deeper. It wasn't quite a smile. But it was the closest thing to joy Mara had seen on that careful, precise face, and it settled into her chest like something she'd been trying not to name for 2 weeks, finally deciding to introduce itself properly. The commission sent a follow-up transmission 4 days later. Stricter in language, citing the Vathiri diplomatic protocols and requesting formal confirmation that Valeth understood the prohibition's scope. Valeth responded in writing, formally in coalition standard. Thesek translated it for Mara, who took notes. I confirm receipt and comprehension of Directive 7.4.2. I note for the record that the directive prohibits advocacy as affiliation, not the existence of relational context. I further note that the subject of the Earth adjudication is a sentient individual of full legal personhood under the Coalition's own Non-Coalition Species Protection Act, Article 12, which explicitly prohibits the reduction of such individuals to contested properties. My conduct remains within all applicable protocols. My position on the merits of the adjudication is driven by the law, which is clear. Any presumption otherwise should be addressed with evidence, not insinuation. Mara read it twice. Is this going to make things worse? She asked. Probably, Thesek said. But she's right. I know she's right. Being right and being strategic are sometimes different things. Yeah. Mara folded the translation carefully. But she wouldn't have written it any other way. No, Thesek agreed. She really wouldn't. Mara filed the page and opened a new log entry. She wrote. Day 1508. Valeth told the commission that I am a person, not a property, using their own laws to say it. She did this knowing it would cost her politically. She did it anyway because it was the correct position. I am aware that I need to be careful here. I am aware that high-stakes circumstances produce intense attachments and that I should not mistake the intensity for the thing itself. I am also aware that I have been careful my entire life, and that what I am feeling has not responded to that carefulness even slightly. Logging for future reference. She saved it. Considered. Added one more line. She would read this. I'm writing it anyway. 19 days in, Mara stopped sleeping well. Not dramatically, she wasn't one for dramatic collapses. The sleep simply became thinner, less restorative, interrupted by a mind that had too many live threads running simultaneously and not enough cognitive processing time to close them. She woke at 3 in the morning and lay in the dark cataloging what needed doing, which was a list she could never fully complete because the end of the list was always the same unanswerable question. What happens after day 22? She managed it the way she managed everything, methodically. Extra hour of physical work in the afternoon to tire the body. Stricter lights-out schedule. Herbal tea from the greenhouse, real chamomile, which she'd been hoarding for serious occasions and had apparently decided this qualified. Valeth noticed because Valeth noticed everything. You are not sleeping, she said on the 20th morning. Not a question. I'm sleeping, Mara said, with the particular stubbornness of someone who has promised to be honest and is testing the exact boundary of that promise. Valeth waited. Mara exhaled. Less than usual. I'm managing it. I know you're managing it. That's what concerns me. You manage things until they become emergencies and then you manage the emergency. I have read 4 years of logs. That's a very accurate description and also somewhat annoying to hear. I know. Valeth sat down at the workbench beside her. Tell me what is running. So Mara told her. All of it, the adjudication timelines, the 3 options, the fact that each option had a cost she kept trying to calculate and couldn't fully because the variables were too unknown. The fact that staying on Earth without Valeth present felt different now than it had 3 weeks ago, and she resented that it felt different because it complicated the decision. The fact that she was angry sometimes at the universe for the timing, for making her meet the first person who felt like actual company after 4 years of silence right at the moment when everything was a legal, political, biological emergency. She said all of this in the flat, precise way she documented things without performance. Because she'd promised to tell Valeth when she was scared, and she was scared. Valeth listened with the full weight of her attention. When Mara finished, she was quiet for a moment. The anger at the timing, she said. I have that too. Yeah. Yes. Although I also think, she paused. The timing may be what made it possible. You are who you are in part because of those 4 years. I would not have the same clarity about what matters if this mission had been routine. Mara looked at her. You're doing Kareth at me. I'm not doing it at you. It is how I actually think. Pause. But I admit it is also intended to be useful. It is useful, Mara said. I still resent it a little. That is reasonable. They sat with it for a moment. Outside, the day was gray and soft, the kind of German autumn day that smelled like wet earth and something ending. The greenhouse behind them breathed its warm, humid breath against the glass. I want to leave, Mara said. She'd been circling this for days. Saying it directly felt like pushing through a membrane. With you. Provisional Vathiri diplomatic status, the adjudication with me as a participant, all of it. I want that option. I know, Valeth said quietly. But I don't know if I should want it. I don't know how much of wanting it is actually wanting it and how much is 4 years of isolation making any connection feel urgent. She looked at her hands. I don't trust my own calibration. Then let me offer you an external reference point, Valeth said. For the first 6 months of this mission, I filed 3 separate requests to extend the search parameters. I argued for the 3rd sweep not because I had any specific hope but because absence of hope is not a justification for abandoning protocol. I had no emotional investment in Earth. It was a dataset. A significant one, but a dataset. And now? Now I am sitting in your greenhouse watching you fight with your own clarity at 6 in the morning, and I am experiencing something that I do not have precise vocabulary for in either of our languages. She looked at Mara directly. My calibration is also affected. I am aware of this. I am also aware that the affection I have for you has not produced any reasoning I believe to be wrong. It has only produced reasoning I did not expect to have. Mara stared at her. I am saying, Valeth added carefully, that wanting something is not evidence that you are wrong to want it. It was possibly the most useful thing anyone had ever said to Mara Voss. She breathed out, slowly. The kind of exhale that releases something that's been held too long. Okay, she said. Then here's what I want. I want to leave Earth in your ship. I want to participate in the adjudication with full standing. I want to make the case for Earth's sovereignty being held in trust for any future human presence, with protected status, no extraction rights, no external settlement. She paused. And I want what's happening between us to be allowed to be what it is, without either of us pretending it's less because the political situation makes it complicated. The silence that followed was long. Not uncomfortable, charged. The kind of silence that a moment produces when both people in it are deciding something at the same time. Those are good wants, Velith said. Can we do them? The adjudication position is legally sound. The Earth's sovereignty argument has precedent in the Cathale homeworld cases from 200 years ago. It will be contested, but it can be won. Pause. The other thing, what is between us? I cannot tell you whether it will be easy. My people have no framework for it. There will be those who question it on principle and those who question it on politics. There will be a great deal of that. I know. You are certain? Mara looked at her. At this careful, precise, extraordinarily stubborn alien who had argued for 6 hours for a biosignature she hadn't known was a person, who read logs and gave complete information and pressed 2 fingers to her wrist like a pulse-bound promise. I've been alone on this planet for 4 years, Mara said. I've thought about almost every possible future, including the ones where nobody comes. I know what I want when I see it. Velith's 4 amber eyes held hers. Then we plan, she said. Together. Together, Mara agreed. Outside, the gray day was softening toward a break in the clouds. A thin bar of light moved across the field, over the seed vault entrance, over the greenhouse glass, touching everything briefly and then moving on. The world looked, for a moment, like something that was still in the middle of its story rather than past it. Mara picked up her notebook and opened it to a fresh page. They had 2 days. She intended to make them count. The morning of day 22 arrived the way significant days always did, as if it were ordinary. The light was the same. The greenhouse temperature was the same. The dandelion coffee was the same. She'd made a full pot, as she always did, out of a habit that had never fully accepted the reality of one. She sat with the extra cup for a moment, looked at it, then poured it into Velith's waiting hands across the table, and that was the end of the 1-cup habit. Small adjustments. That's how the world changed. She'd spent the last 2 days in a kind of efficient grief that she recognized as her particular emotional signature. Feeling things while doing things so the feeling didn't accumulate into something unmanageable. She'd sealed the greenhouse systems into long-term autonomous mode. She'd written comprehensive maintenance guides for every system in the station, on the theory that if her adjudication succeeded, someone might come back one day. She'd photographed every corner of the building, every bed in the seed vault, every annotated margin of every book she'd used. She left the logs running. All of them. Uploading to the ship's archive, which Velith had cleared significant storage capacity for, which was either tactically useful for the adjudication or an act of care, or more likely both simultaneously. Perrick and Osei had already broken down the external equipment. Thesek was running the final atmospheric and bioscan series, the official completion of the mission's scientific objectives. The ship's ramp was down. The bone-white hull caught the morning light and held it in that particular iridescent way that Mara had stopped finding alien 3 days in and now simply found beautiful. She stood in the middle of the agricultural station one last time. Turned around slowly. Let herself look. 4 years of her life. Not of survival, though that too, but of life, which was a different and less reducible thing. The notched doorframe where she'd marked growing seasons. The shelf of seed binders, color-coded by her own system. The coffee ring on the left workbench that she'd never cleaned because it was dated, in her own handwriting, to the first morning she'd gotten the filter working correctly, and some marks you kept. She was not going to cry. She hadn't cried since the first winter, when she'd lost the bean crop to a mold outbreak and sat in the field at midnight with her hand in the ruined soil and simply fell apart for about 20 minutes, after which she'd gotten up and designed a better drainage system. Grief was real and legitimate, and she wasn't going to perform its absence. She also wasn't going to let it run longer than it needed to, because there was a ship waiting and decisions made and things to do. She picked up her bag. She'd packed with the rigor of someone who'd thought very carefully about what mattered versus what was merely familiar. Journals, seed samples, the most critical ones rated by rarity and extinction risk, her 2 laptops and every hard drive, a photograph of her advisor's face from a conference lanyard she'd found in a desk drawer and carried ever since. A coffee mug. 1 book, chosen after genuine deliberation. a field guide to European plant ecology heavily annotated in her own hand, which was now more her book than anyone else's and seemed like the right thing to bring into whatever came next. Outside, Valeth was waiting at the base of the ramp. Not by chance, she'd positioned herself there deliberately. Mara understood. Available but not pressuring. Present. Mara walked to her and stopped. "I need a minute," she said. "Take it." She turned and looked at the station one last time. At the greenhouse. At the field beyond it, green and working, maintaining itself in the ways she'd designed it to maintain itself. At the treeline where she'd stood with a rifle and too much adrenaline watching a ship land 3 weeks ago. The ionization smell was gone. Had been gone for days, actually. She'd noticed it fading as the Vathiri presence became ordinary, and hadn't been certain what to make of it. Maybe it had always faded, gradually, and she'd only been too accustomed to it to notice. Maybe it took other people to dispel it. She didn't know. She filed it. "Okay," she said. "I'm ready." She walked up the ramp and didn't look back. Not because she couldn't bear to, she could bear most things she'd learned, but because she'd already looked thoroughly and what she was carrying with her was enough. The interior of the ship was organized with the functional elegance that she'd come to expect from Vathiri design. No wasted space, every surface dual purpose, the aesthetic serving the function rather than competing with it. Thesek had cleared a workspace for her adjacent to the science station, and someone, she suspected Valeth, though it was presented as a ship's courtesy, had arranged the storage so her boxes slotted in without reorganization. She spent the first hour of flight unpacking methodically. Felt the atmosphere change under her feet as they left the lower atmosphere, then the upper, then the last thin margin of sky that was still technically Earth. Didn't make ceremony of it. Just kept unpacking. Valeth appeared in the doorway of the workspace. "The adjudication petition has been filed. We'll have a preliminary response within 72 hours. How does it look? The legal foundation is strong. The Cathale precedent is applicable and our argument is thorough. There are 3 commission members who will oppose on political grounds regardless of legal merit. There are 2 who are genuinely undecided. We need both undecided votes and at least 1 political member who can be persuaded by the strength of the case. Can they? One of them has a documented record of ruling on legal grounds when the argument is sufficiently clear. I intend to make the argument as clear as possible." Mara nodded. Filed it. Picked up the next item to unpack. "Mara," Valeth said. "Yeah. How are you?" The question, asked plainly, in the honest register they'd built together, landed differently than the same question would have anywhere else. Mara set down what she was holding and considered it genuinely. "I'm in the middle of it," she said. "Not good or bad. Just, in the middle." "That's accurate," Valeth said. "I am also in the middle." "Yeah. Yes. It is unfamiliar. I tend to prefer knowing where I am in relation to the outcome." "Me too." Mara looked at her. "But I think the middle is where the interesting parts happen." Something moved across Valeth's expression. That warm something, the thing that had no precise vocabulary in either of their languages. She didn't smile, but the quality of her stillness changed, became something that was the emotional equivalent of a held hand. "I have prepared a working area for you adjacent to mine," she said. "If you would prefer proximity to Thesek Station, I can." "No," Mara said. "Adjacent to yours is fine." "All right." She went back to unpacking. Valeth didn't leave immediately. "Valeth." "Yes." "Thank you for coming back for the 3rd sweep." "You've thanked me for that already?" "I know. I wanted to say it again from here." She gestured vaguely at the ship, the workspace, the context of no longer being on Earth. "It means something different now." The pause was brief. "Yes," Valeth said quietly. "It does." She left. Mara listened to her precise footsteps down the corridor, evenly spaced, unhurried. Outside the small viewport above her workspace, the stars were extraordinary. Not the stars she knew, or not arranged in the patterns she knew, which was going to require some psychological adjustment. But stars. The same stuff differently ordered. The universe doing what it did, enormous and indifferent, and somehow, despite all that, occasionally producing something that felt exactly like the opposite of indifference. She opened her laptop. Created a new log file. Typed. Day 1 new calendar. Departed Earth at 0847 local time. Everything that mattered came with me. Beginning next chapter. She looked at it. Valeth's workspace is adjacent to mine. She arranged it. I didn't have to ask. Then she started to work. The adjudication lasted 4 months. Mara counted them in the new calendar she'd built. Not Earth days which she still used internally, but the ship's standard timekeeping, which she'd cross-referenced and could now toggle between without thinking about it. 4 months of hearings, petitions, counter-petitions, the specific exhaustion of presenting the same argument in multiple formats to multiple panels while also learning to live in space, which was its own full-time project. She was good at it. At the argument, at the adaptation, at the daily practice of being a person in an unprecedented situation without a manual. She'd been doing that for 4 years. The location change didn't change the fundamental skill set. The adjudication chamber on the Coalition Station Meridian was designed with the architectural assumption that every species present was bilateral and roughly similar in size, which was only partially true. Mara sat in a chair that was technically sized for her species but felt institutional in the way all official chairs felt institutional, designed for the function of sitting, not the experience. She presented her case in Earth Standard with Coalition translation. She spoke for 47 minutes on the first day and answered questions for 3 hours. She cited Article 12. She cited the Cathale precedents. She cited 4 years of her own meticulous records, the logs, the environmental data, the biological archives she'd maintained, as evidence that the stewardship of Earth in her absence had been not neglect but active maintenance, performed by its indigenous human population, which she was the remaining operational definition of. She did not perform distress. She did not ask for sympathy. She made the legal argument cleanly and then she sat down. Valith, recused from direct participation but present in the observer capacity that protocol allowed, sat in the second tier of the gallery. Mara did not look at her during the presentation. She was aware of her presence the way you are aware of a steady source of warmth in a cold room, not distracting, not dependent on, but noted. The preliminary ruling came on day 63. Earth was granted provisional protected status under the Non-Coalition Species Protection Act, pending final determination. No extraction rights. No external settlement. The 5 competing stewardship claims were suspended, pending Mara's participation in a formal consultation process that would inform the final ruling. It was not a complete victory. It was enough. Thesek brought her the ruling transcript and waited while she read it. She read it twice. Then she set it down and sat with her hands flat on the table. It's a foundation, she said. We can build from here. Yes, Thesek said. Valith is. I know. She already knew. She could feel it, the particular quality of Valith's attention from across the station, the way it changed when something went right after a long sustained effort. Tell her I'll be there in 10 minutes. She sat for another 5 minutes alone. Let the reality of it settle. 4 years of silence and 4 months of argument and one planet, designated protected, still turning, still green in the parts she'd kept green, with a seed vault humming below the surface and logs running and a field that would maintain itself until someone could come home to it. She wasn't crying. There was pressure behind her eyes that was adjacent to crying, which she acknowledged and filed. Then she went to find Valith. They were on the station's observation deck, which was essentially a concession to the fact that everyone, every species, every traveler, needed to look at stars sometimes. It was a long, curved space with transparent panels giving an unobstructed view of the local star cluster, and it was almost always inhabited by someone standing quietly looking at something enormous and saying nothing. Valith was at the far end. Mara walked to her and stood beside her. They didn't speak for a while. The ruling, Mara said eventually. Yes. I read it when it was filed. What do you think? I think Article 12 was written for a situation like this, and the Commission knew it, and the 3 political members voted against it anyway, and the 2 undecided ones did what we needed them to do. Pause. I think you presented an extraordinary case. I had extraordinary source material. She looked at the stars. 4 years of data. Yes. Then, Mara. Yeah. I would like to tell you something that I have been building toward telling you for some time. She looked at Valith. At the precise, careful face that had become, over these months, as familiar as the greenhouse wall, as the coffee stain on the workbench, as anything she'd spent enough time with to stop seeing its surface and start knowing its structure. Then tell me, she said. Valith was quiet for one of those counted silences. Then, I have been studying human relationship models and Vathiri bond frameworks, trying to find a category that maps correctly to what this is. There is partial overlap with several, and no complete correspondence with any. She paused. I find I do not require a category. What I require is the thing itself, and the thing itself I understand clearly. Mara waited. I want, Valith said, in the precise register of someone speaking carefully because the words are important and not because they are difficult, to continue in this, in whatever this is, for as long as it is something you also want. I want to advocate for Earth with you and in your absence. I want to work beside you and argue with you and read your logs with your knowledge and consent. I want to be, a pause. I want to be the person in your room that you do not have to explain yourself to. Mara breathed. That's a very large thing to want, she said. I know. We have no precedent. No framework. Your people and mine have never done this. I know that too. There will be people who think it's impossible or inappropriate or politically convenient to call it improperly motivated. There already are. And you want it anyway. Valeth met her eyes. All four of them. Error compounds, she said. I prefer to make decisions based on what is true rather than what is convenient. What is true is this. Mara looked at her. At the stars behind her. At the planet that was somewhere in that direction, protected now, turning in its particular way, keeping its particular secrets and seeds and scars. Valeth, she said. Yes. I want all of those things too. I've wanted them since the seed vault, probably, if I'm being honest, which I promised to be. She held the pause. Let it be what it was. I want this. Whatever this is, precisely. I want the framework we build because there isn't one that already exists. The silence between them was different now than it had ever been. Not the silence of two careful people maintaining appropriate distance. Not the silence of unspoken things. The silence of two people who had said the true thing and were standing in the space it made, which was enormous and specific and entirely theirs. Valeth pressed two fingers to the inside of her wrist. Mara covered them with her hand as she had once before, in a greenhouse on a planet they'd both left and both carried with them. Vathar, Valeth said softly. Yeah, Mara said. That. The final adjudication took 14 more months. Earth was designated a protected indigenous world under coalition law, with Mara Voss recognized as its sole legal representative and steward. Extraction rights were denied to all 5 original claimants. A preservation fund was established from coalition resources, with Mara as trustee, designated for long-term biological monitoring and eventual resettlement support. It wasn't everything. It was more than it could have been. It was, as Mara wrote in her log the night the final ruling was transmitted, a foundation. We build from here. Though we had a clear referent. They went back to Earth once in the spring of the 2nd year. The ship landed in the same eastern field, now taller with 2 seasons of unmanaged growth, and Mara walked through the greenhouse with Valeth beside her and checked every system she'd left in autonomous mode. Everything was running. The seed vault was nominal. The soil sensors showed the field was healthy, the pollinator populations recovering, the water table steady. She added 6 months of entries to the physical logs, records of the adjudication, the ruling, the new calendar she'd built, the work she was doing with coalition researchers to establish the monitoring framework. She wrote them by hand in a new notebook and left it on the shelf next to the others. At the bottom of the last entry she wrote, "Not the end. Not even close." Then she stood in the doorway of the agricultural station one more time in the morning light, breathing the particular smell of the place, growing things and rich soil and that faint green wet scent that was just earth, irreducible, unduplicated in whatever she'd experienced of the universe so far. Valeth stood beside her. Not watching the building, watching her. Ready? Mara said. Whenever you are. She breathed in. Took one more look at the coffee stain on the workbench, the notched door frame, the annotated margins of the books she'd loved in the years when books were all she had. Then she turned away from it and walked toward the ship, and Valeth walked beside her, and the field spread around them green and working, bearing witness in its quiet botanical way to something it had no vocabulary for and no need of one. Some things endure not because they are protected but because they are, at their core, alive, full of roots that run deeper than whatever tries to uproot them, capable of returning from anything that doesn't completely destroy them, persistent in ways that outlast every reasonable expectation. Earth endured. The records endured. The seeds endured. Anne Mara Voss, last human girl on Earth and first to leave it, walked onto a ship beside the person she'd chosen, carrying everything that mattered, heading toward whatever came next with her eyes open and her notebook ready. The universe, as ever, remained enormous and indifferent. And somehow, despite all evidence to the contrary, it kept producing things that felt like the opposite.